They're talking again, filling the silence with words that mean nothing, explaining themselves, justifying, defending, desperate to be understood by people who never asked. And you're watching, silent, still as stone. Who holds the power in that room? The one who speaks, or the one who doesn't need to? Most people believe power comes from having the right words, the perfect comeback, the winning argument. They exhaust themselves trying to prove they belong. But what if I told you that your greatest strength lies not in what you say, but in what you withhold? What if silence itself is a weapon? Picture this: a boardroom, voices rising, everyone scrambling to be heard, to prove their worth, to fill the unbearable void with their opinions. And then there's one person, calm, composed, silent. When they finally speak, if they speak at all, the entire room leans in. Why? Because in a world drowning in noise, silence has become the rarest currency. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this. The philosopher who declared God dead wasn't interested in small talk or social pleasantries. He saw through the desperate dance of human interaction, the way we use words to hide our insecurities, to mask our fear of being truly seen. One does not only wish to be understood when one writes, Nietzsche wrote, one wishes just as surely not to be understood. Think about that. In our age of oversharing, of Instagram stories and Twitter threads, of explaining ourselves into exhaustion, what if the real power move is to remain a mystery? Every day, we bleed ourselves dry through explanation. We justify our choices to people who never asked. We defend our existence to those who were never listening. We engage in battles that were lost before the first word was spoken. But what happens when you stop? What happens when you refuse to play? Let me tell you about the art of silent dominance, a Nietzschean principle that most people will never understand because they're too busy talking to notice. In 1882, Nietzsche wrote about the pathos of distance, the idea that true nobility comes from standing apart, from refusing to descend into the common fray. He wasn't talking about arrogance. He was talking about self-possession so complete that you no longer need external validation. Think about the last argument you had, online perhaps. Someone misunderstood you, attacked you, dismissed you. And what did you do? You typed paragraph after paragraph, trying to correct them, trying to make them see. But here's what Nietzsche knew. The moment you explain yourself to someone who refuses to understand, you've already lost. The modern world has turned us all into performers. We're constantly auditioning for approval, constantly explaining our right to exist. Social media has weaponized our need to be understood, turning every interaction into a trial where we're both lawyer and defendant. And we're exhausted. Dating apps where we pitch ourselves like products. Job interviews where we perform enthusiasm we don't feel. Family dinners where we defend life choices to people who made up their minds years ago. We've become slaves to the opinions of others, dancing to music only they can hear. But what if you simply stopped dancing? There's a story about Nietzsche that perfectly captures this principle. During his time as a professor in Basel, he attended faculty meetings where colleagues would debate endlessly about university politics. Nietzsche would sit there, silent, observing. When pressed for his opinion, he would often respond with just a look, a slight raise of the eyebrow, a barely perceptible smile. His colleagues found it maddening. They couldn't pin him down, couldn't categorize him, couldn't draw him into their petty battles. And that inability to define him, that's where his power lay. Because here's the brutal truth. Most people don't want to understand you. They want to categorize you, file you away in a neat little box so they can stop thinking about you. Your words? They're just giving them the materials to build your cage. But silence? Silence forces them to confront their own projections, their own noise, their own desperate need to fill the void. In meetings, while others scramble to prove their worth with PowerPoints and passionate speeches, the silent observer holds court through presence alone. They're not playing the game. They're above it. And everyone in that room knows it. In relationships, the person who doesn't need to constantly explain their feelings, who doesn't flood their partner with reassurances and justifications, creates a space of mystery that draws others in. Not manipulation, but self-containment. The difference between neediness and completeness. Online? While others write essays in comment sections, defending themselves against strangers who forgot them 5 seconds later, the truly powerful scroll past, unmoved, unbothered, unbreaking their silence for people who were never listening anyway. The man of knowledge must be able not only to love his enemies, but also to hate his friends, Nietzsche wrote. And part of that hatred? It's the refusal to reduce yourself to their level of understanding. But here's where it gets dark, really dark. This silence I'm talking about, it's not just a strategy. It's a mirror, and most people can't handle what they see in it. When you refuse to fill the silence, others are forced to confront the noise in their own heads. When you don't explain yourself, they have to face their own assumptions. When you don't defend, they have to question why they attacked. Your silence becomes their therapy session, and they'll hate you for it. They'll call you arrogant, cold, disconnected. They'll project every insecurity they have onto your blank canvas. And that's when you'll understand what Nietzsche meant when he said, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." Because silent dominance isn't about feeling superior. It's about recognizing that most human interaction is just sophisticated begging. Begging for validation, for understanding, for permission to exist. And when you stop begging, when you grant yourself that permission, you become terrifying to those still on their knees. Watch what happens in your next conflict. Someone attacks you, verbally, online, wherever, and instead of defending, you simply don't. You observe. You let their words hang in the air like smoke, dissipating into nothing. You give them no resistance to push against. They'll escalate. They always do. Because your silence forces them to hear their own voice, and most people can't stand the sound of their own desperation. But this isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming complete. Nietzsche talked about becoming who you are, a process that requires shedding the need for external interpretation. Every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you're giving someone else the pen to write your story. Every time you justify your existence, you're admitting it needs justification. The corporate world gets this wrong. They think power speaking is about dominating conversations, about having the loudest voice in the room. But watch the real power players. They speak last, if at all. They let others exhaust themselves with words while they wait, patient as predators. In relationships, we've been taught that communication is everything. Talk it out. Express yourself. Share your feelings. But what about the power of the unexpressed? The depth of the unspoken? Sometimes the most profound communication happens in the spaces between words. Even in our digital age, especially in our digital age, silence has become revolutionary. While everyone else is building their brand, crafting their image, explaining their lives in carefully curated posts, What about those who simply aren't there? Who refuse to perform? Who let their absence speak louder than any presence could? One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star, Nietzsche wrote. And that chaos? It's not meant to be explained. It's meant to be embodied. So here's the realization that changes everything. Your need to be understood is a prison, and silence is the key. This doesn't mean becoming a mute. It means recognizing that most of your words are fear dressed up as communication. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged, fear of being alone with yourself. But when you master the art of strategic silence, something shifts. You stop being reactive and become magnetic. You stop chasing understanding and start commanding respect. You stop explaining your power and start embodying it. The next time someone challenges you, pause. Let the silence stretch just a beat too long. Watch them fill it with their own insecurities. The next time you feel the urge to justify yourself, ask, to whom and why? Because here's what Nietzsche knew that we've forgotten. The people who matter don't need your explanation, and the people who need your explanation don't matter. Your silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've chosen not to waste on those who were never going to hear you anyway. Years from now, you won't remember the arguments you won with words, but you'll remember the moment you stopped needing to win. The moment you realized that your silence said more than their noise ever could. In a world screaming for attention, the quiet ones aren't just being heard. They're being felt. And that feeling, that unease others experience in your presence when you refuse to make yourself small, digestible, explainable. That's not their discomfort with you. That's their discomfort with themselves. Your silence didn't create that discomfort. It revealed it. And that revelation, that's the kind of power that doesn't need words. Because the truth is, you were never here to be understood. You were here to be, and being needs no explanation.